Happy New Year! I'm George Rusty Cat, aka Neck of a Million, and it's going to be a video where I talk about video games. Obviously, coming from the shirt. And this idea I got from watching Pete of Open Every Box. Open Every Box is a YouTube channel worth checking out, in my opinion, if you're looking to in regards to games. Now, this video is going to focus more in regards to shooters. Not so much the first-person shooters, like everyone's information on games like Rainbow Six and Doom are pretty easy to come by. I'm going to talk more in regards to the more hard-to-find games, games that are akin to Raiden, Cotton, Star Fox, although some might be a bit more well-known than others. I'm also going to keep running gun games and platform shooters to a minimum, so not too much talk of Sunset Riders or Mega Man, although there are two platform shooters I do want to talk about. So with that out of the way, I'm starting off with the Nintendo Switch and then branching out from there. First up is, in fact, like I said, two platform shooters, which are interesting because, well, basically you're using one stick to move, the other to jump, which is standard for the 2D games, and then the other stick to aim and shoot. So the games I'm talking about are Mecha Tales and Bleed. They're both visually different, excellent soundtrack to them. Mecha Tales has almost a dreamy vibe that you'd expect from a Tim Burton film in a sense. Although visually some may think of the Amiga computer system in Europe. And I do like that visual aesthetic, so I went with that. Bleed I wasn't too sure about on first glance because it looks like just another 8-bit platformer, but after playing it, although it's typical chiptune soundtrack, it's very well done soundtrack. And here's where the big difference is when it comes to Mecha Tales and Bleed. Mecha Tales has a kind of standard story, which is drone escapes factory, and now you're running along, shooting out bad guys and stuff like that. And control-wise, Mecha Tales can be a bit stiff. I will have to admit that. Although, despite the stiffness, the platforming, at least for me, the platforming has been a great experience. But it can be a bit annoying when it comes to trying to shoot out enemies. As for Bleed, in terms of gameplay, Bleed is a lot more fluid. Like, you're not just pushing the button to jump, you could also use that button in the air to do air dashes, and you're able to even control the angle of your flight during an air dash, which is great as well. Also, Bleed has a lot more intense action to it. Story is strange though. You're basically hunting heroes, which seems weird, but given the first so-called hero that you fight, which is this weird blobby mess, looks as though the heroes are actually corrupt, so maybe it's not so bad. But yeah, you want to play as an anti-hero in this crazy, brainless mess of a platformer, Bleed is the kind of game you'd want to go for. Especially with the intensity of it, and it isn't as story-heavy either. Next up is the arcade classic In the Hunt. You pilot a submarine, horizontal shooter, going to enemy bases, destroying enemy factories, sinking enemy ships. Although the enemies will send bombers out to drop bombs into the water, you can always surface your sub to fire surface-to-air missiles to take out those enemy subs. Or is it an anti-aircraft gun? I forgot. It's been a few months since I played In the Hunt, I must admit. It is a good game, a lot of challenging, a lot of fun. Although I do admit I don't really care for the soundtrack all that much. But that is just me. Other people may actually enjoy In the Hunt soundtrack. Next up is Project Nimbus. It is one of those 3D flying shooter games. And Project Nimbus is actually very well done. Basically, it's war with giant robots. And of course, you're piloting a giant robot. I love the amount of movement you get. You get a lot of weapon options. And the story is actually interesting too. Like, very well done. The soundtrack is hit or miss, but otherwise very fitting for the scene. Now I'm going to branch off from Project Nimbus to talk about other games that are similar. For example, on GameCube, there's Robotech Battlecry. This is another one where you're piloting a giant robot war, stuff like that, going defending cities from enemy robots, jumping into enemy bases and such. Um, Actually plays better on the Nintendo Wii than it does on the GameCube. At least that's how it feels to me. So, but either way, it still played pretty well on the GameCube as well. Two-player versus as well, and nice unlockables when it comes to Robotech Battlecry. So that is something else. Two other games that I should mention before moving along. They're more first-person shooter, but you're still flying in a ship, which are Colony Wars and Descent. Descent is more in, you're going into cave networks, space satellites, and stuff like that. And those are games that I would say are worth looking into as well. Descent is a lot of fun, good soundtrack to it. A lot of hidden stuff in the caverns that you're exploring and whatnot. So there is that. And Colony Wars I'm only mentioning because it has the best movement of these kinds of games. Sure, it's another game where you're stuck in a fixed in a first-person perspective, and it's kind of a cheat for me to mention it, but I do believe that if you want the most freedom of movement, Colony Wars does it best, which is a PlayStation classic. Kind of makes it surprising to me that not a lot of people talk of Colony Wars these days. Now, along with that, there is another horizontal shooter called Jets and Guns. This is basically the most metal shooter out there. They get the band Machina Supremacy to create the soundtrack, and they do a fantastic job. Just watching the trailer alone says everything about the game. Well, except for the fact that the game also gets weird. What do I mean by weird? Well, one of the levels I admit I'm stuck on, I need to get good, is basically an abandoned beer factory. You know, going into an abandoned beer factory because you're a hired gun and you're hired to, and basically there's one level where you're hired to do that. And I'm doing it all while flying through in a flying hot dog car. So yes, it's Jets and Guns is not just very metal, it's also something that can get silly as well, but is also very enjoyable kind of silly. Now, with that out of the way, next up, a remake of a Sega Saturn classic, which is Panzer Dragoon. And I'm surprised more people don't talk about this one. Then again, a lot of people may look at Panzer Dragoon and think, oh, it's just Star Fox, but you're riding on a dragon. And yeah, that's kind of true in a sense. You're on a dragon, flying through, stopping the enemy, stop a big dragon that's gonna like take over things and such. But one thing I do love about Panzer Dragoon is that you can shoot to the side and shoot behind you. You know, you do the whole side saddle thing. So the dragon will just go autopilot while you're taking aim at the enemy. So there is that little thing. It also makes it surprising to me that there has yet to be a VR game of Panzer Dragoon. Because like, if there's any game that deserves to be on VR, it is Panzer Dragoon. And I tell you straightforward, definitely worth picking up. As a side note, on the Sega Genesis, there's also a game called Outlander. Now, it is totally different. It's basically a Mad Max kind of game. You're driving your car and you're shooting out the bandits or whatever they're called in Outlander. Frame rate is low on it during the car segments, but it's a lot of fun. It is still a good game worth picking up. Although I do admit it's also a bit of a cheat because it's not all driving cars and shooting. And I also make mention of it because, like, if you have enemy bandits going on the side of the car, you always have your shotgun to aim to the side and shoot. And yes, that is something that actually happens. A little window opens up showing the side, and if you time it right to hit the button, you shoot at the bandit that's on the side of your vehicle. But at the same time, you also have to stop off in order to walk along the road and pick up gas and ammo to refuel pick up ammo for your gun and refuel your car. But yes, Outlanders, despite the low frame rate, is a classic that a lot of people are gonna, that I feel a lot of people would enjoy. Next up is Kiki Kai Kai, which I probably shouldn't mention. It's also the predecessor to a classic called Pocky and Rocky, because like you're walking forward and aside and whatnot, depending on the path of the level, and you can like whack away enemies with a stick, with your holy stick. I forgot what it's called. But the main thing with the game is throwing talismans, which, you know, kind of like how in games you shoot. In this one, you throw talismans to hit the enemies. Good soundtrack, nice visuals, a definite arcade classic, worth picking up, in my opinion. Of course, some may disagree. Next up is Twinkle Star Sprites. Now, Twinkle Star Sprite is a wonder of a game. It's basically a vertical scrolling shoot 'em up. It's a versus sort of game. Basically, you have a player on one side, a player on the other side, and basically you're trying to be the one who survives. Of course, as you clear enemies, projectiles come out and form on your opponent's side of the screen. And sometimes it ends up changing from being less of a shooter and more like a weird volleyball tennis sort of game, because when fireballs and such comes to one player's side, they could shoot at the fireballs, and if they do enough hits, that ends up bouncing right back to the other player's side. So it can get intense, it can get crazy. You can even unleash boss battles upon your opponent's side of the screen if you fill your meter enough. Now, I wanted to say more because while I don't have the shooters of them, I do have a couple of Touhou Project games. And some of the Touhou Project games do take inspiration from Twinkle Star Sprite. It's also the reason why I'm mentioning Kiki Kai Kai, which may have also been an inspiration for Touhou Project. However, none of the mainline games do appear on Nintendo Switch. They're PC exclusive. Although I've heard some may have been released on PlayStation 4, but that may have been the fighting game spin-offs. But Touhou Project is another one that I would say is worth looking into. The games are easy enough as is to pick up. You know, there are people who sell them on Amazon. Sometimes they're overpriced though. But there's also a lot of import shops that do carry the games, so that is another series to look into. They are Japanese games, so you may need a translator for it. I would stop there, but there's also one other game I want to mention before ending it, which is the Suguri series, which includes a spin-off game, Sora. I don't know how to really describe it, because basically you're this girl with robotic enhancements, although it's more bionic woman sort of enhancements, in that you don't see the enhancements, but you could definitely see the effect of the enhancements. You know, you're flying through the sky, and you're shooting enemies down with your laser gun. Although you can also carry a beam sword into battle with you and hack at enemies as well. The Suguri games are a lot of fun, especially Acceleration of Suguri, which is a versus game that's more of a fighter shooter hybrid. You should be able to pick that up on Steam last I checked, and I would say it is a lot of fun. And one thing to say about both Touhou Project and Suguri, amazing soundtrack. I absolutely love it. I mean, I will admit there are some songs in both series that I don't really care for, but there's also a lot that I would consider real bangers. So that is what I had to say. Hopefully I've introduced you to some new games that you may actually find enjoyable. So with that said, this time, I am George Rusty Cat, aka Neck Vermillion. I thank you for watching and have a happy new year. And hopefully you may have found a classic that you never knew existed.